Hey everyone, welcome to Talking Tokens, a podcast focused on interviewing the best crypto founders, market players, and up-and-coming startups that are changing the industry every single Tuesday and Thursday. I'm Jacquelyn Melinek, your award-nominated host and former senior crypto reporter turned entrepreneur, and I'm excited to be here with you all. Now, let's get into it. Today's guests are the Wormhole Foundation co-founders, Robinson Burkey and Dan Reecer. I think this is the first time I've had two guests on the show, so I'm excited to do this. With that said, Wormhole Foundation is the team that supports the development of the Wormhole platform, which we will discuss a lot throughout this episode. And essentially, the platform is focused on interoperability. It supports over 30 blockchain networks, multi-chain applications, provides developers access to these blockchains, and so on and so forth. They'll explain it way better than I do. So Dan, Robinson, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jacquelyn. Happy to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, of course. And to start off, I want to know, first of all, how did you two meet? How did you decide to co-found Wormhole together? And what was your foray into the industry? Dan, if you want to kick it off.
Sure. How did we meet? We actually worked together at a previous project. At the time, this was probably 3 years ago, three and a half years ago. I was looking for someone to help lead a BD team. I was at a team called Akala, and we were looking for a BD lead, and we hired two of them, one being Robinson. So he can tell kind of more of his story, but he's an example of somebody who I tried to bring into the industry from outside of crypto. I think we kind of have a problem in the industry where we only want to hire internally, but bringing people in from outside of the industry is always helpful to just bring specialized skill set in a certain area, and just add that to their crypto knowledge once they get up to speed. So Robinson came in, we worked together at Akala, and then after about a year or so, he moved on to the Wormhole team and ended up bringing me on about 6 months later. So it's been a fun time working with him and kicking off the Wormhole Foundation.
Okay. Robinson, what about you? Anything to add on that front?
Yeah, no, Dan took a bet on me at one point, and I'm very grateful for that. To Dan's point, I was at DoorDash for a number of years, scaling, working on the new verticals team. So anything that wasn't core business, trying a lot of new things within the DoorDash umbrella. But I had always been interested in the space, was actually mining Ethereum when you could do that. But this was probably back in 2017, 2018, and then saw an opportunity to get more involved professionally. And, after Akala was a Jump for a little while, focused primarily on Wormhole. And then when it came time to spin out and kind of get serious about the teams behind the protocol and the future of the protocol, decided to start the foundation. And Dan was really my first call in terms of someone I could trust and really help scale and grow this thing.
Nice. Kind of went full circle.
I will add one thing. Yeah. You mentioned us starting Wormhole. I just wanted to also clarify, Wormhole was actually started long before we kicked off the foundation. This was kicked off in 2020. There was originally a Solana Foundation grant given to solve this problem that today seems basic, which is just connecting Ethereum to Solana. So the original team started Wormhole to solve that problem. Then actually the first ever Solana hackathon was called the Solana Wormhole Hackathon. And that was all about building these kind of what we call today multi-chain apps between the Ethereum world and the Solana world. And then that evolved over time, like Robinson said. There was a team at Jump that was spending a lot of resources on the technical side and the business side on Wormhole. And then we've worked together. A lot of our efforts over the past year and a half has been funding teams with grants from the foundation to become independent organizations, kind of building the Wormhole protocol together. So we've got a decentralized group of about 4 core teams now building Wormhole kind of all at the same time.
Cool. Yeah, I guess I meant more like you guys co-founded the Wormhole Foundation. I do remember when Wormhole was associated with Jump, right? How do you kind of differentiate the two now? And when did it kind of take a step away? I know Robinson said he came from there. So obviously they're separate entities now, but when did that kind of happen and why?
Yeah, absolutely. So as Dan mentioned, I think things kind of started with kind of Solana and these three specific developers solving a problem. And then Jump at the time saw a unique opportunity or a unique, vision for what Wormhole could be. And so decided to kind of work on that a little bit more, have more of a concerted effort in growing this beyond just connecting Solana and Ethereum. At the time, right, that was the idea, the problem that was to be solved. But then thinking bigger, it seems in hindsight like obvious, but connecting 30 chains, and we'll get into this a little bit more, but like building all these tools so you can build things across all these chains was definitely not the vision at the time. So back then it was just getting assets between chains, right? And Jump saw an opportunity, more of like an infrastructure play. They had at the time were incubating a few other projects as well. And so when I actually came over from DoorDash, it was specifically to focus on like productizing Wormhole and building out Wormhole. But at a certain point, for all serious protocols, there has to be this like step of decentralization. And so a lot of times that could come in the form of a token, right? We launch a token to incentivize various actors within the ecosystem to do things. And we're very familiar with voting as one of those, right? Like really decentralizing the decision making. But what I think is important, especially for something like Wormhole, some analogies you can think of is like infrastructure for a city, if you will. It's highways. People will use these types of words for interoperability. It's even more important for something like that to be really actually decentralized, because if you can have any semblance of like consolidated control, you're connecting all of these things. You're connecting Uniswap, 30 chains, billions of assets, and being able to kind of like have a few people controlling that is quite dangerous. So once we got to a certain kind of level of, I would say, product market fit or size, it just made sense to say, okay, now it's time to kind of continue on this decentralization journey. So some of us that were there at Jump at the time just spun out, created the foundation, created the Wormhole Labs entity. And as Dan mentioned, we've actually brought on 2 more core contributors, a security contributor and another labs entity. But ultimately this happened, I think, I don't know, maybe a year and a half ago at this point, right after we finished the fundraise or the last fundraise, and then launched the token back in April. So really like quickly went along this pretty massive decentralization journey to today where Jump is, still an investor, but just an investor within the Wormhole protocol.
Mm-hmm. How far would you say Wormhole is on its journey to full decentralization?
That's a good question. Maybe I'll start and Dan fill in the gap. But the purpose of launching a token for specifically something like Wormhole or just in general really is to kind of continue down that path. So we did that back in April. We're actually working on a pretty novel governance solution. So we're working with one of the leading Ethereum governance teams. It's called Tally, and then Scopelift, which is more of like a developer shop specifically focused on governance. We're building multi-chain governance, or we call it multi-gov. So you actually can vote across any chains, making voting more accessible. Today, governance is like, we have a little bit of a problem with it for a few reasons. One of them, like you can't participate in governance and also go like get yield in DeFi. So how do you solve that problem? And then also, if I have my tokens on one chain, but governance exists on another, how do I participate here? So we're actually, for our DAO, for the Wormhole DAO, we're launching multi-chain governance with Tally in the coming month or two. And so I would say that's probably one of the biggest steps we can make, right? Is the initiation of the DAO, the on-chain treasury. However, it's won't be quite done, right? Because there's a lot of, you have blockchains, you have apps that have a pretty like straightforward, here's how you decentralize things. With interoperability protocols, it spans so wide. There's so many things it touches, so many decisions to be made. And so we're going to kind of progressively go down that path of decisions and outsourcing it to token holders, I would say, through the remainder of 2025.
Are multi-chain DAOs common? I feel like I've never heard of that before. You're shaking your head. Yeah.
You're exactly right.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, this is actually the first of its kind of product. So working with Tally and another team called Scopelift, like Robinson mentioned, and we're building it for ourselves. We're solving our own problem because we are a multi-chain protocol. So we wanted people to be able to vote from anywhere, including Solana. But we've got a lot of DAOs on both sides, on the Ethereum and L2 side and on the Solana side, just kind of waiting for multi-gov to go live so they can incorporate it into their DAO. There's a lot of problems we're solving. One being the cost of just voting on Ethereum mainnet is prohibitive a lot of the times. so that people are excited to be able to vote on Arbitrum and still have that vote broadcast back to Ethereum, for example. So yeah, we're looking forward to launching this later this year.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I also feel like multi-chain or interoperability was such like a point of divisiveness years ago. And now it's like a no-brainer for, I would imagine, more and more people as they realize like the benefits of it. I'm curious from Wormhole's Foundation's perspective, how do you kind of view interoperability? Obviously, it's like a core component of Wormhole, but what was kind of like the vision for you guys there when it came to, okay, this is important, we should provide this to developers and users instead of just letting everything be so segmented and fragmented?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I can start. This has actually kind of been a theme of my career, at least in crypto. I started at a team called Wanchain back in 2018 doing interoperability, moved to Polkadot, and they were doing kind of, I'd say interoperability, but only within one ecosystem, similar to Cosmos. And then moving to Wormhole now, it's interoperability for everything. So it's really been cool to see this evolve over the years. The way we think about interoperability, though, is before, even going back to 2018, it was kind of an afterthought. It was like you would build an application, you would build a chain, you would try to get some traction, try to attract some users, and then maybe a year or two later, you would start to think about, okay, how do we get users from other chains, or how do we connect to multiple chains if you're an application? What we're seeing today is that multi-chain, whether you're an institution tokenizing assets, whether you're a person launching a new chain, whether you're launching a new application, multi-chain is in your decision set from even before day one. So you're getting funding in your seed round, you're talking about your go-to-market plan, you're going to include Wormhole or something like it in your plans from the get-go. Because if you're thinking about how do we build a successful business, you don't want to just, if you're talking about a normal business, you're not going to want to just launch in, like, let's say one state in the US. You're going to launch in the entire US, or you're going to launch globally. That's exactly how people are thinking about chains now. You'll launch maybe in the Ethereum ecosystem, want to go to Solana, maybe go to Sui, and you'll be integrating with Wormhole from day one. So that's one of the biggest differences we've seen, even in the last year, is just like that mindset. Robinson, I don't know if you have more to add there.
No, the only thing I was going to add is we obviously believe the category is growing, right? Like at a very high level, if you view the opportunity, it's if we have more chains, more activity on those chains, there's more of a reason to connect them. And this like layer becomes, not to overuse the word layer, but like becomes really, really crucial, really important. It's your picks and shovels play, if you will. So like looking forward, I can probably confidently say again with extreme bias that like the category of interoperability will consolidate, but it will also become much more crucial and important. But what's funny, like I said, is like there was a time a couple of years ago where multi-chain, it was a school of thought. It was like one chain or multi-chain, right? It was like Ethereum, everything on Ethereum, or there were some people that were believe multi-chain. And then that was a lot of the kind of like discourse on, let's say on Twitter, for instance. And so there was a time where it was a big bet, right? It was, we had investors ask questions. We had, builders ask questions, things like that. And it was an afterthought to Dan's point, but now it is almost a sure thing. And to Dan's point as well, like we're starting to see builders come to us much earlier on and say, and not only builders, like on-chain builders, but, institutions coming on chain, issuing assets saying like, before we issue this, how do we make sure we're everywhere? How do we make sure we don't have liquidity fragmentation, things like that? So I think we've been, the team has executed really well, but we've also had that little stroke of luck in terms of the industry really going in this direction where interoperability is crucial and will continue to be.
Robinson, you said that it would consolidate. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, it's a good, I guess when we think about interoperability in general, what happens is you have, let's say we have all these chains as we're familiar with, all these different assets, right? Like that's still largely what we have product market fit today for. Is there's a lot of promising things coming up on chain, but DeFi is obviously like a lion's share of a lot of things. And, tokens or assets are a big part of that. And when we think about some of the use cases that interoperability solves or is involved in, a lot of the times it's like assets going cross chain or developers sending messages and things cross chain. And it behooves the whole industry to actually have maybe like a reduction in what a developer has to deal with, right? Like think about languages on a blockchain, right? We have a lot of developers that are, no Solidity, no Rust, Move, but as more and more of these kind of like new languages come out, you really see an adoption for just a few really kind of like shine, if you will. And I think you'll see the same thing when it comes to interoperability as well. Like developers are going to want to use kind of the same systems that they trust. So for instance, a wormhole message, semantics, and also if we look up a step above that, at the asset layer as well, like liquidity fragmentation is probably one of the, I would say, bigger problems that plagues the industry today, especially when we think about, Ethereum and they scale with L2s. That's great. But you know what that does is it causes another big problem, which is the fragmentation of liquidity, right? Like ETH on Arbitrum is different than ETH on Optimism. And if you try and set those to each other, they're actually not fungible. And so when you have multiple interoperability protocols, you actually create even more fragmentation. So there's both at the user level and at the developer level, there's benefits to having fewer, I would say, kind of solutions. What the end game looks like could be a few things, right? You could have, let's say, a couple of them, and then they're aggregated into some aggregator, like same mental model as like a 1inch or a Jupiter, and they aggregate all these dexes. But I think it in general, both the developer level and the user level, it'll behoove the industry. It'll help us move faster if there's a consolidation to a few. And I don't think, or I hope we aren't the type of industry that will allow consolidation to only one, right? Like, and I should want that as someone who wants it to be Wormhole, but I think it really should be, 2 to 4, something like that. And then there's maybe aggregators that aggregate things at the asset level.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, go ahead, Dan.
I might just one comment on that. We're already starting to see some consolidation in the choices of some of these most important, like what we call systemically important assets. Yeah. Lido wrap stake ETH is the number one most TVL asset in the industry. I think last I checked, it was like 26 billion. Just an interesting use case here. The Lido DAO was looking at solutions for taking wrap stake ETH from Ethereum mainnet to BNB chain. And you can look at the forum posts. It was just months and months of conversation and work and back and forth with the Lido DAO members. And instead of choosing Wormhole or choosing Axelar or choosing Layer 0, they actually chose to use Wormhole and Axelar together as a joint solution. So this is we're seeing this consolidation of messaging verification choices and teams actually preferring two. Part of the reason is it doesn't lock that DAO into one vendor, as they call it. They're using two, but then it's also additional security because they're using the Wormhole security system, getting kind of the check mark on that verification system, but then also using Axelars together. So it's almost like, double the security that they're getting. A lot of other technical benefits, but just an interesting kind of use case to Robinson's point about consolidation and actually people using two of these solutions together.
Mm-hmm. What do you think would deter a developer from, going this route opposed to just going to a single chain? Is it kind of like the mindset that they already have, or they just don't necessarily understand the benefits? Like the devil's advocate side of this is like, what would stop a developer from wanting this? Because it sounds like this would be the most logical choice, but not everyone's going this way, right?
Yeah, I mean, within our world, we see a lot of people going this way, but however, that is our world, right? So, I think there are some teams that still will stay on, one chain. And I think a good example is, or they'll really stay dedicated to kind of one chain or one ecosystem. And maybe a good example of that is like a Jupiter, for instance, on Solana. I think that they're very Solana aligned. Obviously, Jupiter's done really well. I would say maybe that's like kind of the edge case. But one thing about Jupiter is that they definitely use assets from other ecosystems, right? So while they may not have multiple deployments across all these different chains, and they're using some sort of wormhole message to kind of compose all of these different deployments, and then to the user, it's just it's just Jupiter and you can kind of choose what chain you're on. They don't do that. But what they do is they do bring in assets using interoperability protocols. And so there's actually like the way to do it. It could take a lot of different flavors in terms of like how a builder will go multi-chain. But I would say that they're maybe a team that is very focused on Solana and have their reasons for doing so, but they still do bring in assets from outside. And when you think about it from a builder's perspective, we say builder a lot, but like these are entrepreneurs, right? These are people that like want a successful company, and you want to always make your TAM as big as possible. And there's really two kind of, I would say, things to mainly focus on. It's like users within the space, we talk about this a lot. We want more of them, right? Mm-hmm. So they're already limited to a certain extent. So how do you get as many users as possible? There is some people that will only be on Ethereum or only on Solana or only on Sui. But what if you could access all of them? So you immediately expand your TAM, which I think is really important. And then the other one is liquidity. Like chains still act as like these gates to liquidity. And so we actually have like all of these chains we're launching, and we're launching more, and then liquidity sitting on all of them. But if I'm an entrepreneur and I'm going to launch an application, I want, and liquidity is important for my application, which, I think we could just say we agree with.
Yeah.
I want access to that, right? So like to Dan's point, we're seeing a lot of people think about going multi-chain from the beginning, but we still have that like after the fact thought. And maybe just using the Jupiter example is, they're live, they're focused on Solana, but they are still bringing assets in, right? They're bringing maybe wrapped Ethereum in from Ethereum and some assets from other chains. So I think it takes different flavors, but I would say the majority of builders we talk to, and maybe even ones we don't talk to, still are using multi-chain tech in some capacity.
Mm-hmm. Whether or not they know it. Or maybe they do know it, but it's like not exactly as like forefront as you're saying.
And I think the last thing I'll say is like, there is a weird world where Wormhole is successful as it falls to the background, right? It becomes like this, I don't want to associate Wormhole with plumbing, but like it becomes like plumbing infrastructure that's actually just coordinating a lot of different things.
It could be the electrical wires. That's
thank you.
More attractive than plumbing. Yeah. Okay, moving on from that. You guys recently announced the Era3 upgrade. Can you tell us what that means and why is it important for people in the Wormhole ecosystem? This podcast is sponsored by Galaxy. If you're immersed in the world of Web3, Galaxy is a name you need to know. As a decentralized super app with an impressive 21 million users boasting over 100 million monthly transactions, Galaxy is elevating its impact with Gravity, the magnet chain for Web3. Gravity is designed for full chain abstraction, zero knowledge proof-based privacy, and rapid transaction speeds, all coming together to offer an unparalleled user experience. Gravity opens the door for developers to effortlessly build on the largest on-chain distribution platform, and for users, it promises an even smoother, more secure journey through Web3. It's not about being on-chain, it's about being on the right chain every single time. Galaxy is on a mission to onboard the world to Web3, and Gravity is the magnetic force that will propel the vision forward. Ready to launch your Web3 journey? Build the future on Gravity. Visit gravity.xyz for more information.
Yeah, just some backdrop before Era3. We just released about a month ago our roadmap, and that went back to Era1, which is kind of the beginning in 2020. This was the original just token bridge from Ethereum to Solana. We got immediate product market fit back then. That brought us into Era2, which was when we added the generic message passing protocol. So this is for any form of data to go cross-chain. We're working with Uniswap on the governance side to broadcast cross-chain governance data, Pyth, Oracle data going multi-chain using Wormhole. It's not just tokens or assets. In that Era2, we really went from being a protocol, a single focused protocol from taking data or assets from chain A to chain B, to becoming a full-on platform. Part of the reason why it's hard to answer some of your questions around like specific challenges for a specific group is because we now serve really 4 different categories of people. We're helping chains go multi-chain. We're helping apps go multi-chain. We're helping tokens go multi-chain. And we're helping institutions go multi-chain. So in that Era2 is when we really went from a protocol to a platform. And we have a bunch of products that now serve all these different groups. And then Era3, what we just announced is really We kind of branded each of these eras. This is what we're branding as the era of experience, because the focus is really on the experience of the user and experience on the developer. So user facing applications, Portal being one of the main kind of go-to UIs for using Wormhole, had a massive upgrade in terms of user experience. So this gets into more of the back-end kind of integrations that Portal is offering users, but composable intents is one product that we just launched, which is intents-based swapping. So native to native swaps across chains, something that users really want to see, which is fast and cheap to use. And you're getting the native asset on the destination chain, which is always preferred to wrapped assets. And then Wormhole Connect is another product that we enable users or application developers to embed Wormhole inside of their application, so people can do their token transfers inside their app. A couple other more technical things. Our SDK got an upgrade for developers to have a quicker and better experience integrating with Wormhole, and then our Wormhole Scan application it's basically the Explorer for Wormhole. Those are the product things. Robinson can probably give you more insight on that. And then the other side is the Wormhole institutional side. So working with some of the bigger online payments players, as well as asset tokenizations platforms, to basically help them go multi-chain with their initial use cases that they're bringing on-chain. Robinson, I don't know if you want to add to maybe the intents part or Portal.
Yeah, maybe just like I'll take a quick step back too and talk about like protocol to platform. So I think a lot of people in this space there's a lot of great builders. I'll preface with that, but like, especially with interoperability, there's a lot of corners of crypto where people are solving like small interoperability problems here and there. And I think that's great. And we need that. Wormhole's at a place where we've had kind of a long enough time of building. We have a big enough team now where we're going for what I would say is like a complete multi-chain platform. And what I mean by that, or how I would think about that, is it's very similar to a Stripe, right? Like we maybe associate Stripe with payments, but really what's great about Stripe is it facilitates payments by providing 10 out of the box things, right? Like if I want to open up an e-commerce store, they'll give me a widget for checkout. They'll have something that facilitates payments and on and off ramps in the back end. They'll have an analytics thing. Like it's just everything I could possibly need when it comes to payments. And that's where Wormhole is going, and where we are with kind of Era3 is every tool a developer could need to build something multi-chain, they have it. And then with that, of course, we work with other teams to build some applications as well on top of it. So Dan's mentioning Portal, which is like, one of the more popular asset transfer front ends. But I think the big vision, the big takeaway here is like, this is a complete interoperability platform. We work with, Avalanche and their warp messaging. That's fine. We can integrate with that. IBC and Cosmos, that's fine. You can also just use Wormhole instead of IBC, right? It's flexible in that way. But the goal is to take it from like building and solving these little niche problems in these corners of crypto to like actualizing it, going to market, having a front end users can use across as many chains as possible. And that's how we kind of think about, I think at a high level, Era3.
I feel like that's a lot to do all at once, right? Maybe it just goes over my head, but how do you kind of maintain security and also just like quality of the work that you're saying that's going to be provided?
Yeah. I mean, that's a good question. And it is a lot. I think there's this general expectation in this space to have like splashy announcements every other week, right?
Unnecessary. As a former reporter, unnecessary, but yes, go on.
Yes. Thank you. Okay. We need to internalize this a little bit more. There is that little bit of pressure, right? Of like, oh, what are you doing, week after week after week? And, I think that, we are building across so many different products, but the goal is to like bring that all in. What we're doing now is bringing that all on one platform. So it is to answer your comment, like it is absolutely a lot, but we feel like we have the team size and expertise to execute on that. Speaking of team size though, I think one thing we've done recently in the past year is we've actually brought on what I would consider one of the best security teams in the space. They're called Asymmetric Research, a little bit under the radar. A lot of them spun out from Jump Crypto to create this create this entity. They're finding infinite mint bugs, all kinds of critical vulnerabilities across the on-chain world. And they found an infinite mint bug yesterday within CCTP Circle's multi-chain protocol, right? And they report it responsibly with the goal of like continuing to make the space better. And now this is the team that's partially, almost fully focused. A part of their team is fully focused on Wormhole. Mm-hmm. And I think with interoperability protocols in particular, what's happening is I think there's some of the biggest audit bug bounty payers out there. I think like of the top 5 bug bounties, 2 of them are interoperability protocols, one of them being Wormhole. I think on Immunify, we might be one of the highest, multi-million dollars if you find anything, right? We want to incentivize the right behavior. And I think we probably pay, definitely top 3 the most in external audits across all of the on-chain world. And then this team we have is internal, right? Not a lot of teams in the space have internal security teams. A lot of the like motion you typically go through is you'll write some code. You'll be like, oh, shoot, before we hit this timeline, we have to get it audited. You'll book one external audit and then you'll go. We have a team that internally audits everything before we push anything out to an external auditor. So typically you're getting 2 audits. And what's good about internal audits as well is that the team has more familiarity with the code, which is an important thing. A lot of times, like let's just say you imagine something as a developer, you'll put it into code and then you'll give it to someone that hasn't seen anything, hasn't been brought along with the context for the past 3 months, and then they'll check it, right? Mm-hmm. But this team is kind of embedded with us. So I guess all that being said, security is definitely our number 1 priority, so much so we brought in a team internally and have a pretty robust kind of checks and balances process there.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot
of sense. I'll just add, Robinson covered a lot on the personnel side, the audit side, but there's also a whole other side on the tech side that we've built out for Wormhole to make sure that everything is secure. So one thing is we built our own blockchain in the Cosmos ecosystem called Wormhole Gateway. This actually houses some of the security features that not only help on the Cosmos side, but they kind of like power the security for the whole broader Wormhole platform. So one of those things is the accountant or the global accountant. So Wormhole is working across, you can picture just 30 different blockchains. So if assets are moving from one chain to another, something needs to keep that ledger of, okay, 5 left this chain and 5 entered this chain, 10 left this chain and 10. So this is essentially a global ledger that's accounting for all the different in and outflows across all the Wormhole connected chains, which is very important. If there's only 10 assets, that went into one chain, 12 can't leave. It's a maximum of 10. So this helps prevent exploits. The other thing is the governor. So we have a specific, we call it defense in depth system around limiting the amount of assets that can move in or out of any given chain in a 24-hour period. So this also prevents if someone were to exploit one of the chains that we're connected to or an application that we're connected to, it helps to at least limit that in and outflow of the assets that were exploited. So we have a lot of the security systems that are built into Wormhole, in addition to really they are the best security team in the industry. Immunify, the white hat bug bounty website, Asymmetric Research has the #1 guy in the world from Immunify. He's found bugs, and you could probably name 10 different chains that he's found bugs in, but they've built a world-class team over at Asymmetric Research. So.
Mm-hmm. No, that all makes sense to me, especially in the front that you guys have a team internally, because like it's their code, they helped create it, it's their baby, opposed to like, oh, this is just another job for me to audit,
Exactly.
So I get that, and I think that makes a lot of sense, and that's smart, even if it probably costs you guys a fair amount of money. But I also wanted to talk about the press release mentioned expansion into enterprise users at all levels, institutions, etc. How do you kind of look at those different markets today and reaching both crypto native people in those sectors and then non-crypto native ones? It's a big question.
Yeah, I can start. As we looked at the market, like we said, we have a lot of product market fit across chains, apps, and tokens within the crypto space. These network effects are continuing to build, but as we look forward to the next 5 to 10 years, where do we see the industry headed? of course, on-chain activity is going to continue to grow, but we also see more and more institutions that are open to building private chains or layer 2 chains. So these are fintechs, oftentimes in more innovative, risk-taking regions or countries where they're willing to innovate and willing to try new things. So that's one aspect is working with these teams to help connect either their private chain or their L2 into this broader Wormhole network for all the reasons that we've already been through. The other aspect is asset tokenization and on-chain funds. These people are human beings, just like the ones that are building, as crypto natives, and they're wanting to grow their fund or their asset across chains, not just launch on one fund or one chain. And these funds or these institutions they move a little bit slower, of course, than a crypto native application or token. So they want to test things out on their initial chain, but they're already thinking about how do we expand to Solana, how do we expand to other L2s and things like this. I guess that's a high level overview. Robinson, I don't know if you have anything to add on user focused use cases or.
I feel like, Jacquelyn, you're probably really familiar with this like general idea of like the institutions are coming, the institutions are coming. I tend to think about it, and this is like a stretch. I'm going to make this like comparison, but like I think a lot of people have the same mentality about AI. It's like AI is coming, but really what happens is like it's really incremental, right? Like you don't lose. No one's going to lose. 12 million Americans aren't going to lose a job overnight to AI, but it's like you look back over kind of a decade time horizon, you're like, oh, wow, here's how much of like X, Y, and Z category was actually affected by AI. And I think it's like very similar with institutions in crypto, and that like we've probably been talking about it at some level since 2017, right? Of like institutions coming in. But the thing I think that's happened is like since then, that incrementality has actually started to kind of happen. And I don't need to go over any of the recent news with ETFs and things like that, but, having conversations now with, blockchain tech is to kind of this maturity level where like, people are getting, or institutions are getting comfortable with issuing assets on chain. But, and if you think about going back to our conversation about your entrepreneur on chain, like maybe your dev in your commercial, a woman or man getting together and building something, like it's the same basic needs, right? And if it's maybe even more magnified, if we have a conversation with someone who's tokenizing some sort of asset, bringing it on chain, whether it's a stable coin or it's a fund manager tokenizing that, they don't want to be on one chain because their goal is to get this as many use cases, right, as on as many dexes, on as many borrow lens, in as many wallets as possible. So like immediately now we're not an afterthought at all, even more so with these institutions. It's like, we want you in the room when we're designing our go-to-market. We're going to issue natively on Solana, but we the next day want to be on Ethereum and Arbitrum, and we want to eliminate liquidity fragmentation from the beginning. And so I think like, for me, having been in the space for a while, listening to the institutions are coming, now being in the room and like launching with, especially when it comes to these like assets on chain, it is real now. And like we saw recently with PayPal, for instance, right? Like PYUSD, is over $1 billion now on TVL. And we have some other ones coming to both Solana and Ethereum that we're pretty involved with. So I would say that's how I think about it at a higher level. And to Dan's point, there's not a huge difference, I would say. I think the main difference is that in terms of institutions versus like the on-chain world, institutions don't understand the go-to-market as much. But if you give them this know-how, this like, oh, here's how things work on this chain, here are the big players on this chain, they quickly get it, and they can hit $1 billion TVL like PayPal did quite quickly.
Yeah. I think it's also brand awareness though,
Easy. Yeah.
100%. Yeah. Can you give us some names of some institutions that are interested in working with Wormhole?
Yes.
Yes.
Maybe at the next taping. Okay. But for now, we are launching Wormhole Institutional as part of Era3, and some teams that will be. Or I guess
fine. I figured you wouldn't give me a name, but I had to ask. What do institutions want the most of? Is it really putting assets on chain, or is it something else that we haven't discussed already?
I mean, I think it's another avenue to make money, right?
I think everyone's talking about it and we want in.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like, especially if we think about RWAs, like RWAs are great. Don't get me wrong. I think there's a lot of complications that will come with, bringing real world assets on chain. What I mean by that is like, people talk about tokenizing, and lots of different things, right? I've heard mortgages, all this stuff. There's a lot of like off chain or like real world complexities that come with that. But one of the RWAs that like, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this because we know it, but like stable coins are that, right? Like stable coins are RWAs. And so like, we're starting to see a lot of these like yield bearing stable coins come on chain and these kind of like revenue share agreements with that yield. And if you have more issuance, right, like more people holding your stable coin, you're let's say you have 10 bill, 11 billion, there's yield behind that, right? And then you're able to share that, obviously that can go to your balance sheet. And so I think that like that in and of itself, people are seeing Tether, right? Like how profitable they are. And they're like, how do we replicate that? So I think I think RWAs are great and I'm excited about them. And I think some really novel use cases, but I think institutions like stable coins, and that's what we're seeing a lot of, and Tether's leading the charge there. Like they just haven't figured out.
I think institutions will also come to find that it's not as easy as they might think it is. Like Tether's success story, it took a while and they went through market cycles and like they've had their ups and downs. And currently they're in a great place, but yeah. And then again, like look at PayPal, they just came in and they got all of that off the bat. So I don't know.
A lot of incentives though. People missed a lot of incentives. I will say there was a lot of good APR. But I think you make a good point though. Like I think they're seeing that and then they issue it and they realize, oh, it's a lot more than just like issuing something on chain, right? And having a liquidity pool on a DEX on Solana or a DEX on Ethereum. You have to figure out like, you have to drive use cases. And there's actually like a ton of go-to-market know-how specifically for the on-chain world that they need to know for it to be successful. So I think it's a bull market for the consultants, if anything, the consultants to these institutions on how to be successful.
That's a good one. Dan, what do you think? You've been quiet over there. We need to hear your thoughts on the institutions.
About stable coins, except for another opportunity we're seeing surprisingly is non-US dollar stablecoins. There's a lot of activity going on in emerging markets where there's real on-chain activity or even crypto off-chain activity for helping businesses in those local countries either get paid from foreign entities overseas or to pay the other way in the other direction. But these stablecoins are kind of like what we talked about, where they started out as not thinking multi-chain from the get-go, but they're working on trying to get implemented across all these chains. So there's a lot of interesting use cases happening with cross-border payments, like actual cross-border payments, like we've been talking about for a while. Even things like factoring or loans for businesses where they're working on like this setup where they have buy now, pay later, and they need to get the funding to fund different, their personnel or different aspects of their business. So these types of stablecoins in emerging markets are working with Wormhole now to begin trying to go multi-chain and get embedded within the DeFi ecosystem, and even supporting them with public and private chains that they're working with as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I feel like there's just a lot to come on that front. And before we kind of wrap things up, I think we've covered a lot of ground, but I want to get both of your takes on like, where do you see Wormhole going, let's say in the near term, call that a year, versus like the 5-year plan? You guys put out the roadmap in mid-August. There's a lot of talk on the front of like cross-chain interoperability. I see the promise of it. I've always been a believer in multi-chain for years. I never understood why you would be so attached to one chain. I mean, I get it, but in the grand scheme, it doesn't make sense. What are you guys most excited about? Where do you see things going?
Yeah, I think the biggest opportunity for us as we look, even starting with the longer term vision, is just like Robinson mentioned, AI. There's just so many things happening in the world that are growing just data in the world in general, and a lot of that data is going to be coming on chain. So right now we're connected to about 30 chains. In the future, we're picturing hundreds of thousands, if not millions of chains being spun up, and those are public and private chains.
Yeah.
Right now it's difficult for us to scale to chains quickly, like 30, 35, 40. It's very slow and incremental. But one of the biggest things we're working on is ZK, and using ZK to not only make Wormhole more secure and trustless, but also using ZK to help scale our network permissionlessly. So when we look forward 5 years ahead, we imagine thousands of chains connected to Wormhole without us having to do any work, without anyone having to ask for permission, and without any of our current validator set, the Guardians, needing to manually integrate these new chains. So as we build out this kind of highway system across crypto, we really see Wormhole being kind of that data and information highway connecting this entire industry. And Robinson, if you want to go more into that or even the near term, that's perfect.
I think that was really good. Like for us, we want to Wormhole today, to Dan's point, is like it is hard to scale because it's so decentralized. You need to and what you need to have a number of different like full nodes set up for every chain, and I won't get too deep into it, but like it's by design that it is designed the way in which it is. But one thing that's extremely important is like, how do we maintain these principles of like decentralization, security, to your point earlier, but make it super easy to expand? Because that is like, I would say near term and long term focus is like, we want Wormhole to be everywhere. It is like this, easy thing to set up if I want to connect two chains. Like if you could say there's a world of 1,000 chains, you can say 100,000. I'm actually not like too concerned about either outcome. 1,000 chains is still plenty. For Wormhole to be, you want it to be very easy to set up, very secure. And so a lot of our focus right now is I talk about this complete platform. In that complete platform, there's about 6-7 different products. How do you make all of those as secure, decentralized, and easy to set up as possible? So this next, I would say like maybe like one to 2 years is like really focused on the easy part. How do we make it easier to go cross chain and make it so that like a lot of people talk about like chain abstraction and use these different words, but ultimately is just an application can move across different chains and not have it be so clunky. And it'll really help with the app developers, them getting users, et cetera. So I would say that's short-term and long-term focus. And the things that come downstream from that, are more adoption across all the things we've talked about, developers, users, chains, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. Lots to come in the pipeline. Super excited to see what you guys are up to. Can you leave us with a piece of advice, something you've carried with you throughout your time in the industry, both of you?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah.
I'm laughing.
One thing
I tweeted this yesterday, but I think it's still relevant.
Go on.
I was going to add this anyway, just for additional context on how we think about developing our products, but I'll also use it as kind of my advice, which is the way our ethos is very, I think, near and dear to people who have been in crypto for a long time, which is you have to build open source and you need to focus on decentralization. One thing that we've unfortunately seen in the industry to this day is that people like to move fast and developers like to integrate easily, and they oftentimes sacrifice open source code and decentralization. We've gone the hard path, and we've always built open source. The entire Wormhole platform can be seen on GitHub, and it can be looked at by white hat or even black hat hackers. Like we want to be out in the open, and that's how Wormhole has gotten so hardened and toughened over time. Some of our competitors are not open source, which is not, in my mind, an actual crypto product. That's a fintech or a Web2 product. So I guess my advice would be like, people in the industry continue focusing on how everything started in 2008, 2009 with Bitcoin and why we're here. Because oftentimes we've seen over and over again, people who make shortcuts and sacrifice decentralization or open source, it comes back to bite you eventually. And the whole reason why we're here is to build this decentralized internet, and we need to continue, focusing on that.
Preach. Agree. I tend to focus on, I guess I'll focus a little bit more on the operational side of things. I think it's really hard to build in this space, especially for new builders. There's a ton of noise. And I always, especially work with the team on like the signal through the noise. How do we execute on things that drive real value instead of chasing narratives? And it's particularly hard for like new builders, right? Because they don't have as much brand equity, users, things like that. So chasing narratives is so easy. It's like, oh, we want to become relevant. Let's chase X, Y, and Z thing. Maybe there's some value there. I'm not saying that that's not true, but a lot of times like value, like adoption of your protocol, your product comes from executing on longer term time horizons. And so prioritization becomes super, super important in this space in particular, because there's a ton of shiny toy syndrome. There's a ton of noise in general. And so like being able to maybe, I would say, execute on longer term time horizons for the bulk of what you do. Like, hey, this is the direction we want to go. We're going to stay focused, and maybe leave a little bit of room, because the industry is volatile. Things do change. So leave a little bit of room to chase a narrative every now and then. I think is kind of a good framework to use. But at the end of the day, if all you're doing is chasing narratives, you're never going to be leading. You're always going to be following the narratives. And so that's something we think about a lot, especially have been building in the space now for 3 or so years, on like how we're going to continue to build and lead, as opposed to just kind of chase these narratives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good perspective. I like that. You got to get ahead of the curve, not follow it. Yeah. Nice.
And it's hard. Easier said than done.
Yeah. Robinson, Dan, thank you so much for coming on today. I really enjoyed this.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.